Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Horst, welcome back to the podcast. It's so good to have you.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Yeah, so last time you were on, we talked about your origin story and that drive you had as a teenager. You know, you had the maitre d' who taught you many things, and you decided you wanted to make hospitality your life. What I have learned since we last talked and spent some time together is that you almost checked out of your drive for excellence in hospitality, and it had something to do a moment in a little apartment that you rented in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Can you take us there and tell us what happened, Horst?
Okay, all right. That's kind of funny. Well, I have to start with the maitre d' to make it clear, the story clear.
Yeah, sure.
Before I left working with him for several years, he was just an exceptional gentleman, and I was fortunate in my life to have a mentor like that. You know, on the end, we all are what input we had in our life, and hopefully good one, and he was exceptional. But before I left him, after working with him for 3.5 years, he made me look in his eyes and promise him that I never go to work, that I only go to the workplace to create excellence, not just working. Right. And he emphasized, and I'm using it, I'm kind of plagiarizing his comments, if you will. He said things like the chair in which you're sitting is working. You're a human being. You should be higher, think higher, and so on, so on. And I promised him when I left there, I will have that in mind every day. So I went on to work in the finest hotels in Europe. I mean, truly, in the finest hotels in Europe. I worked in Paris for a few years in the Plaza Athénée, in London, in the Savoy, and so on, so on. So and then I came to the US and I worked in the Hilton in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I lived relatively close by in a little furnished apartment. And my intent was, I go back to Europe after 2 years. But I wanted to, in order to start off, this was my career start off really. And I want to learn English. Which I did somewhat, as you can tell. And I wanted to be promoted before I go out because I could see right away, I worked as a room service waiter. I could see right away there were four room service supervisors. And I saw one of them got promoted after a few months to restaurant manager. I said, wow, next time one of them gets promoted, that will be my job. And I knew it would be. So
you were a room service waiter at this point.
Waiter, yeah.
So on the hotel hierarchy, for those of us who haven't worked in it, is that like mid-level, low-level? Like you're kind of starting out?
It's very low. It's
bottom. Okay.
It's just the bottom. But I wanted to be promoted supervisor, and then after a year or so, go back to Europe and finish my career. And I knew it would be my job because I was truly by far the best waiter there. The rest of them took orders and delivered food. I knew the chemicals about, and I started this. I came from hotel school and working with the finest hotels in Europe. So I knew it would be my job. But besides that, the room service manager was German too. So that was my job very clearly. And sure enough, a few months later, there was one of the supervisors got promoted out again. There was my job. And I didn't get it. Somebody else was promoted to that job. Now, the first reaction, that is, I guess, quite typical, was stupid management and so on. All those silly reactions. It took me a few months because my ego was bruised, my pride, my everything, my disappointing and everything. You have no idea what it hurt, how it hurt. But after a few months, I started to realize the young man who was promoted deserved it more. I come to that conclusion because, I was young. I was partying in the evening. I went to work in the next morning very tired.
Yeah.
Mind you, we started at 6 o'clock usually. And I showed up a few minutes late, just a few minutes, mind you. When the manager said, come on, let's do some side work because we have time right now, folding napkins. I said, why me? Why not them? The young man who got promoted arrived happy in the morning, smiled. When the manager said, let's do side work, he said, happy to. And I didn't. When I came to that realization and acceptance, which was difficult, I had to overcome my ego. Yeah. And I went back to my little room and talked to my maitre d'. Now, he had passed away. He didn't show up as his ghost or anything like that, but I talked with him. I apologized that I went to work and not to create excellence. And I said, that is very clear. I did it. And I promised him right there. I promised him. That means I promised myself. This will never, ever happen again. I have to manage myself, so I got to work for excellence. So I wrote on a mirror where I shaved in the morning, go to work for excellence. And my career took off like a rocket ship, like a rocket ship. And I made up my mind, whatever job I do, I will not rest until I do it better than anyone else. And sometimes that means just working harder, or be 5 minutes earlier, or stay 5 minutes longer, and smile to my fellow workers and to my boss. And when my boss wants something, be happy about it, that I could comply, that I was allowed to comply and do it good. And my career didn't stop going on.
How did you get over the self-pity and it's a dumb boss, stupid hotel system? Like that is self-talk that I think all of us have gotten into at one point or another. How did you pull yourself out of it? Did you have a heart-to-heart other than with the maitre d' in your head? Like what? I
truly only with myself and the maitre d', and it took a few months, mind you. It didn't happen overnight, and I watched it when I had, and I happened to hit a mood where I was for a moment open to the fact that, to the truth that it was my fault. It was me and not them. It is so easy to, and that's what we all do. We sit together and blame them. Even sometimes we don't even know who them is, but we blame them. And instead of seeking, and I come to the conclusion, even then, I have to manage what I can manage, not what they manage. Not what them manages, but I have to manage myself. I'm responsible for myself.
So, Horst, we have thousands of young leaders listening, and they can probably hear a little of themselves in the story. I know I can. Still even now sometimes it's like, pull up your socks, Nieuwhof. What changes did you make when you went from working for work's sake to working for excellence? Back, and how old were you at the time? Were you a teenager still? Were you 20?
No, I was 24.
24. Okay, so you're 24. Your attitude shifts. What was different about the Horst that showed up the next day and in the ensuing months and years?
Mostly attitude. Mostly behavior and attitude. And I made up my mind, first of all, I will never ever be late again. Never ever. And it was I think, in fact, in the meantime, it became a possession. I was possessed with that. And I believe it's an insult to be late with people. But walking in late, wait a minute, what's the big deal? I'm only 5 minutes late. And there are 20 people there. That means 100 minutes, by the way. So, that became clear to me. And that's the one thing that should be easy to be done. That was my answer. And then respond positive about needs that there are. I made up my mind there. I knew I crumbled all the time when I had to do something extra. And I said, this will never happen again. I will do it. I'm happy that I have the opportunity to show that I care and responding to that. I made up my mind. At the same time, I realized how I got to work in the morning, not only with my boss. I'm very tired. I walk by everybody and crumble, don't even say good morning. And I said, wait a minute. That means I am not defining my work environment. I can even inform, and I noticed that when I met Upper Mind and went in and said hello friendly, then all of a sudden people responded friendly to me because I was friendly to them, and this simple understanding came. Wait a minute, I want a good work environment. I am responsible for my work environment. I can create it. I mean, and it hit, those things hit me, and really changed my life. The fact that I was not promoted was a major impact in my life.
It's interesting. We've spoken, I've had you speak at a couple of events I've hosted, and I noticed you showed up early, and even on the technology we're using to record today, I'm like, I'm gonna dial in a couple minutes early, and boom, you were there. That's something you've kept for decades now.
Yeah. Well, in fact, also everybody knew when I called a meeting at 3:00, people showed up at 5 minutes after 3. And they also knew that a couple of minutes after 3, I would lock the door. I mean, if I would have meant 2 minutes after, if I would have meant 2 minutes after 3, I would have said so. I wasn't lying.
Now, what would you say to the lead? Okay, here's a question for you. People would say, really? Like, was that then and this now? Or are those still the attitudes that you look for in the team members around you?
Well, you can't help. You look for the attitudes that become part of you. You cannot help that. Even though I of course, with age, learned to be more compassionate about a mistake here or there. And I learned to accept the exceptions. But at the same time, I believe, look, one of the honors of managing or being a leader or being a manager is that you can positively impact the life of others.
Right.
Now, I'm not doing that. I'm not positively impacting their life by compromising, but by being strongly showing them what makes them successful in life, what will be respected by people. And that means, and I've always felt when I ran a company that I am responsible and I cannot delegate. I'm responsible for the standards of the organization. That includes things like being timely and so on. That includes that. So the two things that I never delegated was the vision of the organization. I'm responsible to take the organization to that vision. If I'm a good leader and have identified that the vision is good for everybody, mind you, that plays a key role. If I know the vision is good for everybody, in that moment, as a leader, that is my responsibility to take the organization to that vision. In Ritz-Carlton, it was very simply, I want to create the finest hotel company in the world. Now, clearly, I had to ask myself, is this good for the investors? Is this good for every employee? Is this good for the customer? And is it good for society? Now, personally, I had to take another step, but I'm not selling that. I'm not trying to push anything on anybody here. I had to ask myself, would God approve? Once the answer in all 5 points were clearly yes, I had no more right to compromise this. Not even to the point of delegating it to somebody else. That's my role. And the other role was to set the standards, to maintain the standards that would get us there. So the two are connected. And that includes the general behavior of the organization. Timeliness is extremely important. And it was confirmed to me very, very strongly. I wanted to know in the beginning of Ritz-Carlton, how long does it take before people get very upset when they check in the evening during rush hour check-in and have to wait. Because we knew people were kind of getting really upset slowly if they waited. And so we started that. And we knew it was okay. It was okay if they waited 4 minutes. But after 4 minutes, they were starting to get annoyed. So we went out with soft drinks and conversation after 2 minutes and talked through the line and talked, so they wouldn't notice it went over 4 minutes. Well, we looked at that. Relatively recently, and today they get upset after 20 seconds.
That is true.
So timeliness is extremely important. You don't want to wait for anything. You want to buy a bottle of water, you want it now. You don't want it when they want to give it to you. Want it you. So timeliness was very, very important. So I have to, in that moment, I have to make sure it exists in my organization, and I teach it to the people that work with me. And that's my obligation as a leader.
One of the other characteristics I've picked up in you, and I've seen in other high-performing leaders, and I don't know exactly what to call it, so I'll describe it. But when you and I were talking about this interview today, I said, do you have any time constraints? And you said, I'm all yours. And that has been my experience with you. And you run a lot. I mean, you founded the Ritz-Carlton. You are on the board at Capella Hotel Group now. You're very busy. You're very active. But when I have been with you, you have been fully present. And I find there's a lot of leaders who are kind of distracted or like, yeah, I can give you 2 minutes, or they're on their phone or whatever. Yeah. Is that something you have cultivated intentionally? Is that a characteristic you see in other leaders you admire? I'd love you to comment on that.
It's very intentional. When you asked to participate one more time on the podcast, I have to look, do I have time? Can I really serve you? If I say yes, I have accepted that I have to do this right. Or I will say, no, I cannot do it. I have to question myself, can I do this right? And of course, and to force you into a time constraint means I'm not really accepting to do it right for you. In this moment, I accept it. It's not different than look at your customer. Look, you're serving people. The moment when you deal with it, you're serving them in some form. So service, I always explain, service has 3 stages. The first stage is the initial contact. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good greeting. Obviously, the second stage is not about you, it's about the other person. It's not about you anymore. So you have to say, and so you have to put yourself in a mind frame that I will do my very best in what I'm doing for you. And I'm going to create my product around for you. I make sure you make the right decisions with me. And so on. That's the second step of service when you have a customer. And the third step, of course, is saying farewell. Thank you for allowing me to be with you. Now, the same thing is in this moment of relationship. That's how I look at it. So I look at it. Do I have time? When can we do it? And then make sure I try to block. Sometimes it's impossible because you have another one happen and you have to kind of put them between. I always try to block time after, just in case it runs over, just in case you need something. And that is an automatic response to me based on my service industry background.
That seems to be a not very common skill that I really appreciate and see as a common thread in some of the leaders, the top tier leaders I have the privilege of interviewing. What are a lot of young leaders listening? What are some other qualities and characteristics that you really look for in young leaders, Horst?
Well, when I interview people, of course, I try to see that do you have purpose and vision in life, or are you just living along? Do you want to be? Because if you have some purpose and vision, then I can invite you to participate in my purpose, in my organization's purpose. Some people realize, some people feel it, not consciously maybe, that nothing is worthwhile unless it has purpose. You don't go to work to just work and fulfill a function. Fulfilling a function, my chair, as I mentioned earlier, is fulfilling a function. Human beings should be going to work to create excellence and be part of a purpose. And the purpose should be the driver of everything. I don't have a meeting and without discussing and saying, if this meeting is not serving our purpose, in the case of Ritz-Carlton, to become the finest hotel company in the world. If we have a meeting here, or whatever we do right now, if it doesn't serve that purpose, we shouldn't have it. It's purpose. And young people should have to understand, what they have to understand also, what I would want them to understand is that at work they define themselves. That's where they define themselves. People, work and the level is different. It's not. Most of your waking life is at work, ladies and gentlemen, like it or not. Why not take advantage of that time and define yourself as an exceptional human being while you're doing your job? And those things come together. It's about you. And when you interview people, you want to see, do they have that kind of understanding? Or is that silly to them? And it's interesting, the millennials, it's very interesting. And surveys show that there are two things about the millennials that are, the one thing they say is, do it the way I want it. It's my way. With other words, if I would have gone to a McDonald's, I would have said, I take the number one. The millennial says, I take the number one, but give me 2 slices of tomato and a half a pickle and give in a little no lettuce. Do it my way. Do it my way is the attitude of the millennial. But at the same time, the work attitude of the millennial is, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And when you really listen, and of course, I had thought about that too when I was a young man, except I was afraid to ask. During my time, you didn't ask. But they have no question asking that. And when you show them, if they have a good reaction, when you show them that they're part of a purpose, and of course, so I had to show them as a Ritz-Carlton, our purpose is to become the finest in the world. Let me know. So I'm telling you, join me in doing that. Become part of a purpose. Don't come to work here. Come here for the intent of become the finest in the world. And here's my motive. And that's what you have to do as leaders. Here's my motive. This way we will grow and you will have opportunities. So, and this way we will be respected. So will you be. So connecting the millennials to the purpose and motive of the organization will make it very clear to them what's in it for them. Very clear. And when you interview young people,
and I would encourage people to go. Go ahead, Horst. I'm sorry for cutting you.
Yeah, when you interview young people, you have to seek, do they get that? And you have to determine if they get that. If they get that, they become loyal to the organization because they now become part.
You're totally right on that. And I was going to encourage people to read your book, Excellence Wins, which is a fantastic book. I have so much underlined in that book. And also you can listen back to the first interview, which we will link to in the show notes that I did with Horst a couple of years ago, because those are principles you can teach. And that is the thing. It's not like you find a whole lot of people. Yeah, you hire to a certain profile, but then you can teach them these things, which is so good. One more question just about characteristics. You think about your life, you're extremely busy. Your time is valuable. It's not like you're sitting around going, oh, I'll give Carey an hour, 90 minutes. Like, you got a lot of stuff to do with your life. How do you say no? Like do you have a filter that you use for what you allow to come onto your calendar, what you don't? And then how do you say no without offending everyone around you?
Well, that's a difficult question. That's a question I ask myself all the time. And I have to be honest. I have to be very honest. I have the filter is Savannah, my assistant. And we look at every request and the requests of participations they're constant. Can I just talk to you? It is overwhelming. I mean, and you can do everything. And I have a hard time saying no. Because particularly when you come to my age, what do I want to do? I want to serve people. I want to help people to see how to build a career and how to be successful. You want to serve. And then all of a sudden you say no. And another endorsement of another book and so on. It's very difficult. So I'm kind of feel really hopeless in that. And so I always say, Savannah, and here's how you go back and I'm just overwhelmed. I cannot do it. Please forgive me. I cannot do it. But that's the answer that I have to say. Very honestly, I used to make excuses. That's kind of silly. I felt later silly to do that. So just saying, sorry, forgive me, but I cannot do it. Time-wise, whatever, you cannot do it.
I've never put in the forgive me, that because I've thought about this a lot. I've asked a lot of guests on this podcast. I got a section of my new book, but that forgive me, if it's sincere, and it is, I'm the same way as you. You probably get way more requests than I do, but I get more than I can possibly handle. Yeah. But I do think that forgive me is a really good way to approach it.
Well, interesting. We had a pretty good study on that. And in fact, how do you handle it? And it's related. How do you handle a guest that has a problem? And we called it problem resolution. We, in fact, certified every employee around the world. Mind you, with Ritz-Carlton, we were in 5 continents. And every one of our hotels was the leader in the market segment where we were. But every employee, 20-some thousand employees, was certified in problem resolution. How do you say, I'm sorry? So when a guest had an issue, the point was, I didn't want to lose that guest. A guest that's unhappy, particularly today, watch out. The guest that's unhappy becomes a terrorist against your company. And you, against you. So we taught, how do you make sure that the guest is unhappy doesn't become a terrorist, in fact, becomes an ambassador? So the way to handle that, number one, if you reach a complaint, comes a concern, number one, listen, attentively listen. Don't look the other way. Don't, even if a pretty girl walks by, don't look at her. Look them in the eye. Listen. Number two, show empathy. Number three, apologize. And never say don't do that, and say, always say, forgive me. And if the guest that had a TV problem complains to the busboy, and the busboy says, forgive me, the complainer nearly feels embarrassed that he ever even complained. But why did he complain? He or she, of course. Why did he complain? He wanted to get rid of his frustration. And now suddenly somebody totally accepted that frustration. In that moment, it's gone. But if you don't accept it, say, I will tell them, the frustration will go up. Because the only reason they tell you is to get rid of that frustration. Now, the fourth step to us was make amends. And we had a fifth step, delight them. That means the busboy was now requested to find out what room that guest is in, make sure that the TV gets repaired right away, and then send the guest some cookies or some fruit or something and say, I just want to apologize once more. Can you imagine? That guest, instead of becoming a terrorist, became an ambassador. And it's no different in generally handling things. Forgive me, I'm sorry. And in that moment, people will forgive you. But just say, sorry, no, forgive me, I'm sorry.
That is a masterclass in handling adversity. And, it's funny, I've done a lot of work in my backyard this year and had a lot of projects done around the house, and not a whole lot has gone right in 2021. The rarity of someone actually apologizing for their mistakes is just so rare these days. Yeah. Even in Canada, which has a reputation for being polite, Horst. I mean, I had my boat washed by the marina this year, and they didn't do a very good job. And they acknowledged that it wasn't right, but nobody apologized. And I'm there in the yard with the marina manager, with a senior mechanic who's fixing something they said they couldn't fix for 3 weeks, and yet it was a little D-ring that he was able to put on in 2 seconds. And there was a 21-year-old kid, like young adult, who was there, and he was the new boat dealer. And he could see that I was not very happy. And I wasn't like mad or anything, but he could tell they had really let him down. Of all the people there, including the marina, it was the 21-year-old who came to me, looked me in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry. We have really let you down."
Oh, there you are.
And I'm like, I pulled him aside after and I said, this has been a bit of a gong show for sure, because it was a 5-week process in getting my boat back and it still wasn't done and blah, 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 big problems. But anyway, I'm saying that sarcastically. But I said to him, you have a future. If you keep that attitude and don't lose that, like, my goodness, that is a superpower in this world. So I'm just underscoring what you said. And that can be trained, right? That's what people forget.
Yeah. Absolutely. We certified everybody in that. And we empowered them, we empowered every employee up to $2,000 to move heaven and earth to keep a guest who has an issue. You see, today that's much more important. During my time, it was so important to me in the hotel business because the guest isn't just a guest, but usually the travel agent calls the guest and says, "How was your stay?" And if that guest said wasn't good, I didn't only lose that guest, I lost the travel agency. Today, it's much worse. They can go on the internet and on the social networking and destroy you.
Yeah. Lots of one-star reviews out there, right?
How can you not teach your employees and empower your employees to make sure nobody leaves unhappy? How can you not do that? So that was very clear to me. So I went up and at the same time, I wanted to tell my employees who I established high expectation, I established them. I wanted to tell them all, I trust you to not let that happen. And I trust you up to $2,000. And I won't question you. And by the way, hardly anybody ever gave $2,000. Nobody, in fact. One incident that cost $2,000 was the rest. They bought some cookies or bought breakfast for somebody, and the guests were amazed.
I want to talk about that. We touched on that in the first interview. I've never forgotten it. But for those who maybe it's not close to their memory, they never heard the first interview, haven't read your book, that is such a powerful principle. So you empowered every employee, from the person changing a light bulb to the busboy that you were at 24, to spend up to $2,000 to resolve a problem. And you had how many employees worldwide? Roughly
24,000.
24,000. So do the math. I'm not good at math, but 2,000 times 24,000, that's a lot of money every day that could disappear, right? And I can see the bean counters going, "Horst, that's a disaster. We're going to be bankrupt in minutes. That will lead into profitability, Why was that such an effective policy?
Look, I was sued. I was sued for mismanagement by several hotel owners. Why was it important? Well, yeah,
I didn't know that. What happened with that?
Well, yeah, but it never went that far. They all of a sudden saw, hey, this is working. Well, it was very, very simply this very reason. And mind you, I didn't just woke up and say, oh, well, let me ask everybody to give $2,000 away. My concern was, how can I keep every customer? How can I keep every guest? For me, a great organization, to me, does 4 things. Number 1, keep the customers that you have. Never lose a customer. Be sure your customer goes out and recommends you and wants to come back. That measurement, to me, is the most important measurement. Now, they do 3 other things, but that cannot interfere with number 1. Number 2, you find new ones. Number 3, you get as much money as you can from your customer because they trust you, but you don't lose them. And number 4, you work efficiently. Not cheap, efficient. So that's what you do. So that was clear to me, everything. I have to keep the customers. They have to leave and recommend to others. So besides that, I knew the average age of my customer. They were low 40s, just over 40. So in other words, they could travel another 30 years, which because of the average spending that I did, they would be worth about $200,000.
Wow.
So why wouldn't I invest $2,000 to keep them? And through that, gain new ones. That was the issue. The issue was not giving $2,000, but at the same time, I realized if I do that, I will be clearly able to tell all my employees, I trust you. I trust you to do this. And nobody misused it. Nobody. Never. And beautiful stories came out of that. Wonderful stories. And many excited customers, lifelong customers.
Can you give us an example or two of some of your favorite stories of employees using
I
it?
always enjoy telling the story because this was so overwhelming. And there's this young couple who checked in Cancun, and the honeymoon couple. And the first day he lost his ring in the sand on the beach. And this was crying and disaster and digging. And the more you dig, the more it's gone, obviously. And it becomes evening and the beach is closed. And the 4 beach attendants ran and bought 4 metal detectors. They didn't have to ask a manager. Let's face it, if they would have asked a manager, probably the manager would have said, well, you won't find it anyway, or okay, buy one. They bought 4. Each one bought one, and they found the ring. Now, the next morning, they had the ring back. And they cried more than the night before. And the young man went and wrote to every newspaper and went on TV interviews and radio interviews and talk about this ring, this company who really cared. It was immeasurable.
Yeah, that would make Good Morning America. That would make the Today Show. That's incredible.
Millions of PR and the loyal customer. And it's such beautiful stories, so many beautiful stories that happen that it made you that it makes you want to cry sometimes. What the employees all did to take care of the customer, and that was the reputation that Ritz-Carlton had. I was recently in a speech. I was applauded because I was in a room. They didn't applaud me. They applauded the reputation that Ritz-Carlton had. But think about every employee was defined by that. And I always say, if today there would be a job opening and there are 100 employees applying, the Ritz-Carlton employee that applies, the ex-Ritz-Carlton employee would get a job because of the image that we created. That's why young people, if you go to work, define yourself as excellent. And, like it or not, you're very much defined by the image of your organization. So help make it a good image.
What else did you do when you co-founded Ritz-Carlton and along the way, along your whole journey, where your peers or colleagues thought you were crazy, where they said, why are you even doing that? I'm sure there must have been moments.
I mean, there's sad moments too. For example, and I never forget it because it pierced me in a sense. I made it very clear. I want everybody to know the purpose of the company. We don't hire people to come here to work. Hire them to join the purpose of becoming the very best. And one of the general managers said, "You actually want to talk to dishwashers about purpose? How dare you? How dare you? You mean, with other words, they just can wash dishes without more? I mean, you learn those things. It's outrageous. You know, Aristotle taught, you cannot be fulfilled without purpose and belonging. So if we are leaders, why wouldn't we offer purpose and belonging? For them and selfishly for the organization at the same time. You can combine this. So many moments you have when you work where you absolutely enthralled and how wonderful. I mean, here is a doorman, and there was a customer became ill late in the night, and the doorman took him to the hospital. He was empowered to move heaven and earth to keep the customer. Took him to the hospital in the middle of the night, late in the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and stayed with them till 8 o'clock in the morning in the hospital.
Wow.
And from there, on his telephone, informed the hotel, informed the family of the guest, and so on. Now, when you get that message back to your office, you want to cry, and you want to go and hug this doorman, and it's such many beautiful. He didn't question himself. He knew he was supposed to move heaven and earth to help the customer. That was his role. And if it costs money, it's $1, so be it.
How do you, because my grandfather was a janitor, I worked as a janitor at my dad's company and was a busboy, actually, at a restaurant when I was in college.
So was I.
So I have worked a little bit. How do you instill dignity to those who might not normally find dignity in their work?
Yeah. Well, we touched on that in our last speech.
Yeah, we did.
I learned it from my Medadi again, who when I was there, who told me constantly excellence, and I didn't get it when I was 14 years old. It took me a while, and then I went once a week to hotel school, typical German upbringing, and after 2 years we were asked to write an essay, what we now feel about our industry. And I thought about a Medadi, who I realized that night when he approached a table, that the guests on the table were proud that he came to them. And I questioned myself, why? After all, we were supposed to be the servants, and they the very fine ladies and gentlemen, the guests in that hotel. And I realized they were proud because that gentleman had defined himself as a fine a person of excellence. And that's when I wrote my essay and named that we are ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. And I took it with me. When I started Ritz-Carlton, I made that the motto of the company. And I made it very clear to everybody. You're not servants. You're ladies and gentlemen, unless you sentence yourself to be less. But you are ladies and gentlemen. And if you do excellence in what you're doing, you are defining yourself as a lady or gentleman. Only you can define yourself as less. And when you tell them that, I made it very clear, our profession is service, but we're not servants. We are ladies and gentlemen, and our job is service to ladies and gentlemen. And that is a beautiful art to care for people.
So powerful. It really is. When you came to America, I want to hop back to where you were in San Francisco. So you'd been trained at some of the finest hotels in Europe, seen that. You came to America when you're 24 years old. You're working at a lower level. What were some of the gaps in service between what you had experienced in Europe and America at the time?
I mean, mind you, I kind of omit that because my first job when I came in, I went to Houston. I was there only 2 weeks. So,
okay.
Mind you, I come truly, it just shows you how cultural differences are sometimes so stupid and not understood, and your thoughts are so stupid sometimes. And the funny thing is, and I tell my kids that and they laugh. I arrive in Houston, in a nice hotel, mind you. Yeah. It was pretty new, and I was hired by a manager of the hotel. He saw me working as a waiter in the Savoy in London. He hired me to come over to US. I came legally, and worked in that restaurant. The first night I worked actually as a waiter in that restaurant, and I had an order for fish, a fish order. And so I looked in a hurry, where is my fish knife and my fish fork? Where are they? It would have been unthinkable in a fine hotel restaurant in Europe to serve fish without fish fork. And there was none. There were none. And I nearly quit that moment. How can I serve fish? Now I don't have any. How can I serve fish? That's how. So there's some real gaps for the moment that happened. And so it was, that's how silly you can think though. And the gap, in the cultural gap that exists and what you
sure.
think and thinking absolutely certain that what you believe is right. Well, it's not. It's not.
For the record, I don't know what a fish fork is, and I've been to Europe, so I guess I've got some learning to do, Horst.
For the record, I haven't seen any for many years, not at home, nor anywhere else.
But you would see that. What were some of the other differences you saw between Europe and America?
Well, a key difference was in Europe, in those finer hotels, we knew exactly, we had learned exactly from which side you serve what, and so on and so on.
Right.
And that there was no importance relative to that. There was more importance here to be nice. And really, in the finest, during my time, I cannot judge so well now, in those very fine restaurants, I mean, these are the finest in the world at the time. There was an arrogance about us as a waiter. This was an arrogance. And I developed through that when I came here and saw the guest really doesn't care if I put a soup in from the left or the right, as long as I'm nice about it. And that silly thing of being that precise and being even arrogant about it. And so I came to the realization very much so. And then I worked for a while in a French restaurant, also on the side in San Francisco. There was an arrogance in all the European waiters that were there. And I developed the phrase simply, elegance. They were all so elegant, but without warmth. Elegance without warmth is arrogance.
Oh, wow.
And I learned here the service wasn't arrogant at all. And often in the restaurants where I worked, it was a lot of arrogance that we had. And so that was a real difference. And say, wow, I have to mix this and put as much professionalism in it. That's what I try to do with Ritz-Carlton, and put it a little bit more professional, but keep the warmth of the American caring human being. And that was the success that we had. I mixed the two a little bit. And I made it even stronger in Capella later. Of course, Capella is a different story. Capella is ultra luxury. It's not, Ritz-Carlton is luxury. Capella, we went to an ultra luxury mode. But the philosophy did the same. We just tweaked it even more.
What would the difference be between Ritz-Carlton and Capella? Because there's only a handful of Capella hotels, right? In most countries.
There's a good reason for that, and there won't be that many because take Singapore, and most of you and your listeners may know our hotel in Singapore. You may have seen when President Trump met with Kim from North Korea, they met in the Capella in Singapore.
That's good to know.
Close by is the Ritz-Carlton, which I was part of creating and opened. A fabulous hotel. The Ritz-Carlton in Singapore is fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And they're running about an average rate of about $400, $450 a night. Great hotel. 10 minutes away is a Capella. We run $1,200 a night.
Wow.
That's the difference.
yeah, there you go. So what is the difference then in terms of service and standards?
Well, mind you, in a Ritz-Carlton, we serve you well in the way we possibly can as an individual. And in a Capella, it's all individualized. In fact, when you make a reservation, we call you, what can we do for you? My teaching was, mind you, I started that company totally
right.
myself. My teaching was simply, we do absolute everything for the guest as long as it is legal, moral, and ethical. We do it. Period. We call you after you make a reservation, we call you and said, you're coming to Singapore, hypothetically Singapore. You come to Singapore, what can we do for you in Singapore? Do you have any allergy, any needs? Should we make reservations for you? What is it you want? There's no check-in time, no check-out time. We will have a room when you arrive. period. Even if I ever keep a room free the night before, it doesn't matter. You check out, as long as you check out before dark, it's fine. There's no check-in time. There is no hours of operation. You tell me when you want to eat. We will close, we open half an hour earlier, the restaurant, that's fine, or one. And we keep it longer open if you want to. It's all about you. And of course, that takes cost. And of course,
Yes,
all the finishes. And there's a lot of cost elements involved here. So I sold the company 2 years ago, but we cannot put a Capella just anywhere. A Ritz-Carlton can put many places. But Capella, because I need a very high rate and high occupancy. Yeah. Otherwise, I can't do what we're doing.
So COVID hit a couple of years ago, last year. And I read, and you can correct me if my research is wrong, that you called about 30 friends in your business when COVID hit and gave them advice on what to do during COVID. And apparently nobody followed it, or very few did. What advice did you give them?
No, a few of them did, yeah. The number one thing, well, I said, let's look at a very tough situation that's hit us, and let's accept the difficulty that is going to come at us. Let's accept it. Yeah. And that takes some very, very hard decision. But how do you make those hard decisions now? Those decisions that you may have to cry over, but that you have a responsibility to make. Number one, though, do not change the vision that you have. Do not change your purpose. If your purpose was to become the best in your location, that should not change. The purpose has to do the same. Number two, your values cannot change. Your values generally cannot change, even though they're a very hard decision, but they have to be within your values. Number three, be sure, sit down, figure out how can I make sure that my customers, as many as I can touch, think higher of me once we're through Corona than they thought before. That means you stay in contact with them. That means you respect your travel agents. Be sure you talk to them. Let not all of a sudden, because they're not sending business to you, forget them. Communicate with them, and so on. Next, you have to let some employees go, but be sure you keep the very best ones. But the rest, you have to go. But figure out how they can be the first one to come back, the ones that you let go. Now, but stay in contact with them. Keep a relationship going. But the fact is, some of them have to go. So there's a very tough decisions that I talked with them through how to handle these things and how to communicate those things. And of course, it has to be if you reopen, don't talk about your luxury anymore. Talk about how safe you are. But be sure you are. Let's be sure. Question yourself, is my hotel safer than anybody else's? If that's not a question that you have, that you agonize over and apply, then you shouldn't be even in our business right now, because safety of human beings comes first. So there's a type of conversations I had, obviously.
Well, that's good advice. That's really good advice. We also, the landscape is changing. In the last decade, Airbnb emerged, and, hoteling is very different than it was a decade ago. So I don't own a hotel. I just stay in them from time to time. But assume I'm a client that you're consulting with, and I'm like, Horst, tell me how to compete as a hotel in the era of Airbnb. What would you tell me? What would your advice be?
Well, what can be the difference? So be sure you're superior in the difference that you created. Number one, of course, is service. You don't have to wash dishes when you're in our hotel. You don't have to wash your own dishes. We wash them for you. You have room service. You have all those things. Be sure that those things are exceptional. But the other thing that has to be exceptional is the safety in your hotel. Again, back to if it is Corona, or if it is general fire safety, the apartment that you're going to rent doesn't have sprinklers and a system and immediate help in the hotel if it happens. Be sure that you have it, but you have it right. So identify all the differentiation. Be sure that the differentiation is very well managed, that you're exceptional in it. No, but the fact is, we are in a huge change that is happening. Huge change in the hotel business. The traditional, and that includes Airbnb, the traditional hotels that you know today, or even the great names, even some of them who I was involved with in creating, pretty soon you check in on this thing over here.
Mm-hmm.
You make a reservation on this thing, you arrive, you call your elevator, you go to your room, you open your room, and you check out. With other words, hospitality is not a part anymore. Most of those hotels will become sleeping commodities. Sleeping commodities. But that's a beautiful opportunity for hotels that are still offering hospitality.
Yeah.
I'm not dismissing that. Mind you, I'm not dismissing that.
Yeah.
I will do that too, but at the same time, I will create more hospitality than ever before. And I will do it in a way where if you experience it, and then you go to the apartment that you rented in the Airbnb where there's nobody welcoming you, and nobody is saying to you, I'm here for you 24 hours, no matter what happens to you. Even if you fall ill in the middle of the night, I'm here for you. That's what I have to say, and be there. And it has to be clear to you when you check into my hotel, even though you made a reservation here. But I'm still wait for you and check your work and be with you. I'm still a human being that is available to you anytime. Truly are. So those elements I have to greatly improve. In that moment, I improve against the commodities of sleeping that are developing today and against the Airbnb.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I've sensed that a lot of companies, for real reasons, have used COVID to cut back. They had to.
Sure.
But I feel like service has been dialed back, even when COVID no longer justifies it. In other words, we'll have shorter hours, or there will be fewer services, or and I've been to a boutique hotel, my first stay in Toronto a couple months ago, because we were pretty much grounded here for a year. It was at a boutique hotel I'd never stayed before, and it was that anonymous experience you talked about. You check in on your phone via text. There was no one at the hotel. It was all remote. If you had a question, and I felt like, am I on another planet now? Like, I am wanting to talk to a human being, and it certainly wasn't a discount hotel. It was actually a fairly expensive hotel, and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like there's a massive opportunity for service that many organizations are missing, Horst.
Massive. It will. This what is happening right now will create unbelievable opportunity for people that want to create hotels, hospitality hotels. Hospitality is such a beautiful thing, but it means, what's hospitality? There's a beautiful story. Saint Benedict in the year 500, mind you, he wrote to his monasteries. Mind you, at that time, travelers stopped in monasteries, and he wrote them, if a guest arrives, treat him as if it was Jesus himself. Okay? Wow. And then, and in fact, the abbey, the head of the monastery, if the guest is by himself, men only stay there by himself, be sure you join him for dinner, even if you have to break your fast. But before dinner, wash their feet. Aha. Now that's hospitality. Yeah. That is true hospitality. Now, I don't quite wash your feet, but when you come to the hotel, you have to feel I'm actually a human being that says I'm here for you. And mean it, and show it, and welcome them, and so on. And if I'm going to do that, if you check into my hotel, I promise you, if I would still do a hotel, if you check in, particularly today, you would want to say, gosh, I can't wait to come back. Your question today is, if a guest checks out of your hotel, are they anxious to come back? And if they are, they won't look for an Airbnb or for one of the sleeping commodities, even though they pay less there. Here's the fascinating thing. A recent survey shows that 70% of the market says, I'm willing to pay more for the same product if somebody really cares for me. Service. Wow. And here's something even more important. Over 80% of the millennials say so. Wow. Now, and pretty soon, all your customer millennials, if I know that in a clearly defined survey, why would I become a commodity?
See, that's so interesting. You're running this through a filter in my mind. So, this has been a strange 18 months, 2 years, but these people I know in a little town just north of here started a restaurant, and we visited them for the first time right as lockdown was starting. And they're the restaurant we visited 90% of the time in the last year and a half when they've been open. And they'll be on my podcast, Simon and Darcy. So if you're listening, shout out. And the food is incredible, but you know what it was? They make you feel like you're the only person in the restaurant, and they genuinely care. And they opened up a second business, which I think is incredible. So it's one of the reasons I want to interview them. But you're right. I think it feels increasingly scarce. And when you have it, it is gold. It's platinum.
Yeah, Carey, you sit in your office for lunch. There are a number of guys hanging around. We say, let's go for lunch. Where are you going to end up going? Where the food was good? Oh. Not true.
100%. And telling all my friends to eat there when they're in town.
You go where you felt good, which includes the food. Well, no doubt about it. You can't take it out of the equation. But you end up going where you felt good because of the overall experience. But with the whole service attitude, last week, I was staying in a 5-star hotel in California. 5-star. Well, big name. I come back, I checked out. I went to my meetings in the morning, came back in the evening, the room was not made. In fact, it was never made. Was never finished. I had slept there the night before, it was not made. So the next morning when I checked out, I told the front desk person, I went for checkout, I usually just give my keys. I went, by the way, nobody made my room. I said, just so you know. He said, I heard that all the time. I mean, that's a 5-star hotel. They're already not a commodity anymore, but they still have a name that sounds good.
Oh, wow.
But they're becoming a commodity. They don't even make the room. I heard all the time. They didn't, with other words, that employee didn't feel part. Like I said, they weren't taught. If you get a complaint, you own it. And didn't say, if he would have said, forgive me, I would have nearly been embarrassed that I complained. Forgive me, I would have said, it's okay, no problem. Instead, I get a questionnaire afterwards.
How did we do?
And I really hit him on that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was a trip advisor. I said the lowest ever. Can't help it. I had to do that. I was so annoyed. What do you mean? They do it ever. I mean, nobody.
Okay, so let's play that as a case scenario. What would have turned that around for you? So you got missed on checkout. What would have turned that around?
You know what? It didn't even bother me. I was glad that nobody went to my room. I just wanted to let him know. And if he would have looked at me for 1 second and said, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe it. That must be annoying." I would have said right there, no problem. In fact, I'm glad nobody was in my room.
True.
It didn't bother me at all. No problem whatsoever. And it would have been forgotten. And I would have responded on the questionnaire based on how he treated me and how the rest of the treatment was, and not on this silly. I mean, don't even. You mean it happens all the time? He says it. No, it happens all the time.
Pick the wrong guy to say that to.
I mean,
yeah.
What?
Oh, Horst. So I know you're involved in some future ventures. You've got your finger on the future of the hotel industry. Where do you think service and hospitality are heading, good and bad, in the future?
Well, because of this commoditization of everything, the rest who will depend on the service have to be truly excellent at it. And and I'm being asked, and it's I can't even believe sometimes the questions that come up and said, well, and I'm in a meeting, there's a speaker and talks about the hotel industry, and he tells the whole industry is changing, everything's changing, commodity, in high tech and everything. Yeah. What is changing? Does it really change that a human being who happens to be a guest wants to be respected? You tell me that's going to change? You mean the very essence of our industry, caring and service, is going to change? It is so silly. All that that's if I think like that, because they're not thinking anymore about the guest. They're thinking about saving labor cost, making it easy. That's right. That is right. We have to think about that. But I have to think about how can I make my and use my technology to make my service to the guest even more efficient, even better. Use the technology to support my caring for the guest. Then I have something. So yes, there will be all kind of things will changing. But believe me, ladies and gentlemen, no, to the guest or your customer or your patient or your parishioner, whatever you call them, they still want you to respect them and care for them. Doesn't go away.
I couldn't agree more. And it's something I find myself longing for. So you wrote Excellence Wins. A couple of years ago, you released it. So that means you probably wrote it 3 or 4 years ago over a period of time.
Yeah.
And in there, you kind of enumerate all the Ritz-Carlton principles and a whole lot more. The book is called Excellence Wins. Based on what we know now in the world that we're living in this moment, are there any principles that really rise to the surface that you're saying, above all, pay attention to this?
Well, I didn't know at the time, something I mentioned before, which blows me away. This comment, I talked about it, but not strong enough because it's so different. It's this individualization that the millennials want. And that is absolutely huge. If I'm not recognizing that as a business, I'm making a serious mistake. They're very clearly saying, do it my way. It's not about you, it's about me. They're saying that very strong. And I mean, they're amazing. They're willing to pay more for it.
It's a little like the Capella philosophy, right?
No question about it, except we went to
ultra high end.
I knew that if you take the whole customer base of a Ritz-Carlton, there is the customer that uses the rooms and wants the good service and so on. And then there's the customer that buys suites and is willing to pay $2,000-$3,000 a night for a suite. And that's what I went for those kind of guests only. And I knew there were enough for smaller hotels. I knew the expectation in a smaller hotel. They want privacy, but connectivity at the same time. They want do it my way, all the way, and so on, so on. So we went for that. But it is the same thing, except to the general market.
Right.
Take care of me the way I want it. And that, to understand that didn't hit us. And I expressed that earlier too. And the timeliness. The time stuff is so important. Everything, you have to do it now. Do it now. Don't let me wait. Show up in time when you have it. Respond to my email now, not later. Check me in now. Get me, and this whole thing of I want it now, I have to readjust. We have to readjust our processes around that. And if I ignore that, I'm going to have a problem. And this whole thing of individualization by the millennials is unbelievably strong. But again, if I do it well and I show them that I care, they become loyal. Loyalty, by the way, is nothing else that they will trust you with what you're selling and what you're selling.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge then is to do that at scale, because at Capella, there's a fraction of the 1% who can afford that. You're talking about serving millions of people in the service industry moving forward. Any thoughts on how to do that on a budget and at scale?
Well, to me, scaling was something a little bit different. I had to scale the thinking and the feeling into different cultures of Ritz-Carlton and different cultures. Mind you, we were in 5 continents. So scaling that all that meant to me, I have to systemize my selection and training of every employee, but at the same time, bring the same thinking in and conversations into the hotels.
Right.
That's why we had a daily, what we called lineup huddle with every employee, where we discussed the service principle of the day, and we shared what's going on in the company and what is new in the company, and maybe a letter or an unusual letter of compliments and so on. Shared. So with other words, the dialogue, the narrative in the hotel, no matter what, today is the same. I put similar narrative into the hotels. And so you can bring that into the smallest denominators and so on. So how do I repeat something? I have to make sure the processes are the same relative to what I want to repeat. And the thinking is the same relative to what, so I have to make sure the narrative, what I want to do, is the same. And that is the way to scale. And would take too long to go work out the processes that we worked on to be sure. What happens, again, in a big sense, the guest checks into Shanghai, somebody I know, and he calls me and said, I cannot believe I walk into this hotel, into the Ritz in Shanghai. It looks totally different. It is totally different, but I could have told in 3 minutes I'm in a Ritz. Well, that's the ultimate compliment. You want to be sure it's the same. And you can bring it all the way down to make sure you're repeating this. The sandwich looks the same, except be willing to adjust to the customer. That can't go away. You see, that can't go away. That very individualization cannot go away. That's what I'm saying. So, So you still streamline everything, but because of your teaching and the understanding by everybody, you create individualization, and that's how you scale it.
You know, it resonates so much because you do drill that in at every level. My wife is dairy intolerant, and she's been that way for a couple of years. And it is amazing, because we're out on the road a lot normally, how often that seems like such a surprise question to people on the menu. It's like they have to go check with the kitchen, and I'm sure it must come up like 20 times a day.
Come on, today
in the average restaurant.
It's a given today.
It is a given today.
So that's the point. I mean, what's the process? Once you have an understanding, I mean, particularly if you are a little larger, you should be, I mean, this is so simple, everything. We collected all comments and then understood what is important here. What's important to do or not to do. So
right.
Once you know that, you go out. I mean, if you don't hear that is a general expectation. I mean, come on. In that moment, you have to go back and teach everybody. And that is, again, scaling it. Now, what we would do then is say in our daily huddle, the next week, that's a subject together with the other subject. Bang, 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 drive it home. And then it is repeated. And then we read a letter where somebody compliments us about it. And then we may read a letter where somebody complained that it didn't happen. And then we read 5 letters where people compliment about this. Bang, it is in the organization. So you process this, and you process the situation, you work on it. That's all. And keep You're dealing with human beings, and that's how you handle it with human beings. It's not one memo from the boss, and you think it happened. You're kidding me. You think it's going to happen with one of your memos? Come on. And if it is something that the man's a little bit touch, no matter what it is, then you go to the people who do that job and say, how do you think we should do it?
That is an even better idea. No one's ever asked her that question.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's Taylorism, because we are the bosses. We tell you how to do it. Tell a story in room service in my book. I mean, instead of going to the room service people and say, how can we do room service better? The boss sends a memo how to do it better, and it creates more complexity. It's so silly all. It is.
Can you explain Taylorism for those who may not know it? It's an industrial term, right?
Taylorism. Taylor was the one that kind of helped the industry during the Industrial Revolution to create mass production.
Yeah.
What he actually said in a simple way is, okay, this guy just tightens 4 screws, the other one puts this piece here, the next one tightens, and so on, and out comes a car, if you will, or whatever. And he said, in fact, the guy that does this doesn't even have to know what we built. And because all they do, that's what he said, not me. All they do is they do things. We think and they do. In fact, Ford was terrible. We honor Ford, Henry Ford, how great he was. Well, he was a miserable guy. He said to his human resource people, we don't need people with brains. We need people with 4 hands. Don't care about what they really think and who. It doesn't matter what they think, as long as they do. And that was Taylorism. And we still have one foot in that. We think they do, which is. And I have news for you. The guy that was tightening the 4 screws, he knew better how to do that than the guy up in the office.
100%. Yeah.
And that's
Horst, I'll tell you, it's always stimulating. You make me rethink so much of what I do, and it's always a delight to have a conversation with you. Any final thoughts for leaders as they try to navigate this really less certain than ever future? What would you say to them?
Any one of you, have a purpose. Look, leadership starts with leading yourself. What is your purpose? Then commit yourself to it. And then make no more excuses. Go for it. The excuses, the reasons that you find why it won't work, either what your boss comes up with or you. The reasons why you find the reasons is just an excuse. It's just an excuse. And now I'll tell you a secret. The way you will come with reasons, and you will, we all do. It's simply, we look for something, what if it doesn't work? What can I plan? What can I plan so that I'm not planned? It's our insecurity that finds reason. Excellence is never an accident. It's always the result of high intent and hard work. What's your high intent in what you're doing? You have to question yourself. Whatever you're doing, what's the highest intent? And then go for that intent. It's a decision, man. Your destiny is not accident. It's the decisions that you made relative to your work. But excellence is high intent and hard work.
So inspiring, so practical. If people want, obviously Excellence Wins is available everywhere books are sold. Do you have a website or anything people can find your work on these days?
HHS at HorstSchulze.com.
Okay.
HorstSchulze.com. It's very simple and so on. So I can tell what was it? HorstSchulze.com.
Okay, great. And we'll link to that in the show notes. Horst, again, thank you so much. I hope we will do this again.
I hope so too. All the best to you. God bless.
God bless. Thank you. Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.